All right, everyone. So welcome to our continuing series from Midcoast Council of Governments and the Lincoln County Regional Planning Commission on our series of planning workshops. Today's topic is shoreland zoning. My name is Emily Rabi. I'm with Lincoln County Regional Planning.
I'm Laura Graziano. I'm also with Lincoln County Regional Planning.
I'm Max Johnstone from Midcoast Council of Governments.
So we'll just turn it over. Do you want to do a quick intro?
Yes, this is a
Make
man
it
who
formal.
this is a rare treasure for many who are attending today, and we are going to make sure this is recorded. The man, the myth, the one who I also mispronounce quite often, Colin Clark.
Well done on the name. Well done on the name. Everybody, with a name like Colin, you answer to just about anything these days, so that's fine. But yeah, thanks for having me. It's a great opportunity to get to speak to a vast group of people that are all in the shoreline zoning game in some respect or another. I usually ask at these, and you can't see on the Zoom, but how many people are planning board people? Okay, cool. Select board people? Good. CEOs? Okay, good. So the reason I always ask that question is for the CEOs in the room, I have to imagine that you've run into a situation where you've been at a planning board meeting. No disrespect to the planning board people because you're here. But I get a lot of complaints from CEOs that they'll go to a planning board meeting and something gets approved, but the CEO knows it may not be in compliance with the shoreline zoning ordinance as they know it, whether it's expansion of an existing camp. They're just putting a little patio out front, but that expansion ends up going towards the water, which is not legitimate. And it's absolutely fantastic to have planning board people here. Sometimes we get some select board people or appeals board people. Sometimes those are all the same people because people wear multiple hats. So they get the information that a lot of CEOs have to go to trainings throughout the year to maintain their certification, but there are no certifications for planning boards or select boards or appeals boards, which, not that I want to get certifications for the other people, but it would be good for folks to come and attend some of those meetings like you all are, so they get similar information that CEOs get at some of our CEO trainings. So good on you for coming out, listening to me run my mouth for a little while here. I do have a slideshow set up here, but at any point, if you have a question based on a slide, or you're just like, hey, I'm itching to ask this question, I really want to know the answer, feel free to let me know, whether you're on Zoom or in-house here, and I'll try to get whatever answered. And in my laptop case here, I have a little notebook as well, because I'm going to be honest with you, I've been doing this a fairly long time, but sometimes folks will ask a question in a way that I haven't considered. And with Chapter 1000, as you all know, in your local ordinance, things can be viewed in different ways. And just because I haven't thought of it doesn't mean it's right or wrong. Perspective is everything. So asking questions is great. And there may be a situation where that's a great question. Let me write that down and get you the legitimate answer in writing after talking to other staff, our AG's office, who was very helpful, to make sure that we're giving you the best advice possible, because these days a lot of things get appealed and a lot of things get dragged into a courtroom, and you want to have the best, most solid information you can in those situations itself. So we'll get going here and see what we got. All right, so as many of you know, back in 2013, there was a bunch of changes that were made to Maine state statute. Those statutes guide how Chapter 1000 is written. In 2015 is when the last updated the guidelines. There's a lot of ordinances out there that have been updated. There's a lot of ordinances out there that haven't been updated to meet the 2015 guidelines. Obviously, the statute requires stuff to be consistent, but there is this DEP thing where we used to actually say that this is a mandatory thing, like every town has to adopt. 2006, 2010, that happened. A lot of you probably got letters from Rich Baker and saying you got to do this by this date, if not, we'll state it opposed, whatever. Well, the 2015 version, that didn't happen. It was a different time then, and the choice was made that that wasn't going to be made mandatory. That comes with some negatives because there was some statutory changes that were made that got implemented into 2015, like the non-conforming structures expansions. It used to be floor area and volume. Everybody is used to dealing with that. I'm sure absolutely everybody in the room that did deal with that also realizes that determining the volume of the structure is not very easy. I did a training back in 2013-ish, where we were in a room similar to this. I broke all the CEOs up into groups of 3. There was 30 people there, so we had 10 different groups. I gave them all the materials and said, I just need to know the volume of this room. And there was 10 groups. I got 9 different answers. Not great. And I mean, to be honest with you, this is Maine, right? So when you're dealing with legally existing non-conforming structures, those probably aren't brand new because they wouldn't be non-conforming. And people have done things over time, dormers, knee walls, all those things that people have added to their structure, and calculating the volume of that is not simple. There's only one town, and it's down in this general vicinity, there was a CEO that actually was super, super smart and created an app on their smartphone that they could hang something on the wall that was a known distance, and they could hang it on a wall, hang it on the floor, take pictures of the whole room, and bam, on smartphone, told them the volume. And it was accurate, like really accurate. Other than that, tough, right? I don't know how many former geometry professors are in here, but that's the level that you're dealing with a lot of times, especially dealing with some of these old buildings. So in 2015, based on the 2013 statutory change, non-conforming structure expansion principles changed from floor area and volume to footprint and height. I mean, everybody can go outside of this building, throw a tape measure up to the peak of the roof, tell you how tall it is. Super easy. Equally easy, everybody can go around the outside of this building, drip edge to drip edge, and tell you what the footprint is. It's a simple area calculation, rather than dealing with all the dormers and all that other stuff. And that's the change that was made. So we went from floor area and volume to footprint and height. Very simple to understand. Not only is it easy for CEOs, planning boards, select boards, appeals boards, private citizens, consultants, to get that information and to be able to produce that information. It's also very easy for the applicants to understand, hey, you're only allowed 1,500 square feet of footprint. You're at 1,550. So we need to get it just a little bit smaller. So even though it wasn't a mandatory adoption, that language is in statute. And that is mandatory. So with that being said, if your town is still a floor area and volume town, as we have been advised by the AG's office, if somebody puts in a permit application and they're still using floor area and volume, you review it under your standards, the way you always have. And then you're supposed to review it again under footprint and height. And whichever one is more restrictive is what would apply. Does everybody do that? I am pretty sure that's a no. You're not doing that. So the easy out on this thing is to just adopt. And not only do you get that provision, you also get all the new stuff that's in there that we're going to kind of go over here in a little bit, the revegetation requirements, hazard tree information, some of the exemptions that are out there. It will make your life as CEOs, planning board members, select board members, appeals board members so much easier. A lot of the policies that Rich Baker wrote back in the day that probably you have, whether it's through an issue profile or just an email saying, hey, this is how you should do it, are actually within Chapter 1000 now. So there is no ambiguity where folks are wondering why you're coming up with that solution to the issue. Yeah, just go to the next one here. So, and I'll kind of blaze through some of these rather quickly because I'm sure you guys know how this works. You know, the municipality at the municipal level, you guys adopt your ordinance, your map, you administer and enforce your ordinance. You know, you deal with the variance requests. At the DEP role, you know, after all that's happened locally, you send that stuff in, we review it and approve it in terms of ordinances and maps, we provide advisory opinions, we provide assistance during enforcement cases. One side note to that, the DEP does not handle the enforcement stuff. Sometimes we have municipalities that want the department like, oh, can you guys just, you know, do the enforcement on that? No. I come from an enforcement background and I know how to close cases, but legally I don't have the right to administer and enforce your local ordinance. That's the local rule. I'm absolutely on board, just as well as staff is, to help, but we can't write the NOV, we can't write the consent agreement, we can review it, we can go out in the field with you, help, advise, we just can't do. And then obviously we do provide comments on variances, and hopefully when we do that, the towns consider those comments. Another big thing that happened, which I'm sure a lot of you folks already know, is the timber harvesting options. There's presently 3 options. Number one, option 1, you repeal timber harvesting from your ordinance completely. You never deal with timber harvesting again. Regulated timber harvesting, meaning somebody's selling the wood, it's on 2 acres, it's hanging a forestry notification, the Maine Forest deals with it, Maine Forest Service deals with it. And the reason I kind of lean towards that option is when the Forest Service or a forest ranger shows up on the site and they look at a cut, within a few minutes, they know if it's a violation or not. I've been out on cuts with CEOs, and you'll spend hours pacing it off, measuring stumps, taking pictures, trying to figure out if it is a violation. I'm not a forester. I don't have that background. Folks that have that background, they can recognize stuff very, very quickly. Did run into a situation once in one of the northern central Maine towns where I said something like that. CEO, I mean, he wanted to come across the table and strangle me because he's like, I've been a forester for 40 years. I know how to do this stuff. Like, great. You're kind of an oddity. You know, that not a lot of towns have a forester as their CEO. A lot of times CEOs are former contractors, plumbers, electricians, somebody that's been in the building trade that knows how buildings go up. Typically, that's what I've seen through the years. But I'm a huge proponent of, you know, option 1. Number 1, they know if you're in compliance really quickly. Number 2, they deal with the enforcement. So I don't know about all of your towns, but I'm assuming that your legal budget is probably not huge. Theirs is. They have the attorney generals backing them. You have your local attorney that you pay per hour, per email, per phone call, per document that they produce. There was an enforcement case where there was timber harvest, and you know the town was dealing with it, and they had almost $50,000 in lawyer fees. Now, if they win the case, yes, it's usually settled out. You get that money back, but they had to kick that 50 to the law firm to get the service. There's not a lot of communities out there that have 50 large to do that, and so it's another consideration to make. But if you really want to hold control of that, there is option 2, where it's kind of a joint enforcement action between the Forest Service and the town. They come out, they help you, they advise, determine compliance, and assist in the administration of the enforcement. Really good option as well. That way it takes some of the onus off from the town. The last one's option 3. The Maine Forest Service, as is underlined, will not assist you. They will not help you. It's a go it alone situation. I do not recommend option 3 because it's a lot of work. Maybe some of the communities that you deal with doesn't have a huge timber harvesting situation going on, but I am sure there's some, because timber harvesting in Maine is statewide. Probably not so much in downtown Portland, Westbrook, but in a lot of the communities, even in this area, there's significant timber harvesting that's going on. So we kind of went over that, so I'm going to skip through some of this. The timber harvesting thing, this is, like I said, it's defined as cutting removal of timber for the purpose of selling, producing forest products. It doesn't include like the veg removal stuff that a lot of the CEOs and planning board members deal with. If somebody's just out cutting trees on their yard, whether they sell it to the next door neighbor for firewood or not, that's not a timber harvest. They don't have a forestry notification form. And the other real thing here is on a lot, it's not a timber harvest if you don't have 2 acres of land within the shoreline zone, which is a key component. I dealt with a case years ago where 4 neighbors got together and they hired a cutter to come in. Like, this is forestry. They hung the notification form, the whole deal. Well, each one of them only owned 1.25 or 1.5 acres. In total, they were cutting on 3 acres. But none of them owned 2 acres. And they clear cut that stuff right to the water's edge, thinking that was their way around to open up $1 million view. Didn't work out. They got paid for the wood, but they paid a heck of a lot more putting all that back. And the old adage, it's really tough to stuff the toothpaste back in the tube. You never can really put back a forest or a natural buffer. They ended up planting 10-foot tall trees all over the place. I think it cost them $60,000 between the 4 of them to replant it. And I'm sure today, because it was 10 years ago now, it probably looks better. But when they first did it, it kind of looked like a Christmas tree farm. It didn't look right. And they didn't get the benefit they were looking for, because before they could have at least limbed the bottom third and seen the water or thinned it out a little bit. Now all that stuff is just right in their line of sight. They can't see anything, can't see the water, none of it. So it's unfortunate for them. Thank you. Individual private campsites, that's another thing that kind of got updated, and this is pet peeve material. That's why the slide's in there. But so Chapter 1000 used to, back in the day, people used to be able to do things and say things and make arrangements with a handshake, and people understood what was going on. So the language used to say you're allowed to have a private campsite. Well, that wasn't good enough, because somebody, I think, took that to court, and it didn't end up working out because just the singular tense wasn't solid enough to deal with that issue. So the change that was made in Chapter 1000, now it says 1 campsite per lot. And it did go on to say, if you already have a principal structure, a dwelling, then you need to meet the dimensional requirements for that principal structure. In addition, have 30,000 square feet for an individual private campsite. Now, when I say that, an individual private, I want to go to the next slide. It might be a good picture. Okay, so this is twofold. Clearly, it looks like a forest on each side, and they did a lot of cutting in the middle. So this is a violation on the clearing standards. But an individual private campsite in the way that maybe you haven't built your single-family home there, you're just using it recreationally while you save up the money to build, or maybe the lot is small, and that's what you end up with. That's kind of an individual private campsite type of deal. The reason I mention that is we get a lot of calls. It usually happens 4th of July-ish. My family used to do the same thing. My grandparents had a piece of property on Pleasant Pond in Richmond, and every July they'd have a family reunion, and everybody would come from everywhere. You know, the RVs would start parking in the driveway. All us kids would, you know, have little tents set up all over the lawn. That's not an individual private campsite. Towns have the option to regulate that because, you know, yes, you do have a couple RVs sitting in your driveway. Yes, you do have some tents sitting out on your front lawn. And some towns do say, hey, you can't do that because you don't have an additional 120,000 square feet to have all that stuff. When that question is posed to me, I often use the story I just talked about, my grandparents. That wasn't what we were doing back then, and I don't think that's what the intent is for people doing now when they have family over for a family reunion or something like that. They're just gathering, you know. So if they're there for a weekend, they have a couple RVs parked in the driveway, and the kids have some tents set up. I wouldn't encourage anybody to start busting people for that. By the letter of the law, maybe you could, but you know, I like to use a little bit of common sense on that one and not, you know, get people all fired up about it. Now, if Buddy comes in with his camper and all of a sudden he's there all summer for 3 months and he's got a pipe hooked into your septic and he's plugged into your electrical, okay, that's something different, right? That's intent to use for a long period of time versus, hey, we're over for a long weekend seeing the family. Yeah, go ahead.
So is the state minimum shoreline zone lot size 40,000?
So the lot size on, we'll say like on a lake, this is on a lake. So in most cases, well, the minimum guidelines is 40,000 square feet, 200 feet of frontage.
Okay. So, so if you had a house on there and you wanted to put an individual campsite, you need 70,000.
Correct.
If your minimum shoreline lot size is 80,000 square feet, why do you need 110,000?
See, right. So if your town is more restrictive than the guidelines, I would encourage communities to think about how they're writing their ordinance to include a provision that doesn't do that. Because I don't think the methodology that went into getting an extra 30,000 didn't anticipate towns requiring 80,000. So if your town already requires 80,000, you may want to write into your ordinance that on lots that require 80,000 square feet of lot area, you're allowed to have an individual private campsite without adding the addition. If you have 2 private campsites, you would need to add another 20,000 square feet of lot area.
Okay, so send that back.
Yeah.
It was, we didn't go into that detail. We had an 8,000 square foot minimum lot size, and when it came to the requirements for this campsites, we didn't include that thing about the extra 30,000.
Right. So we conditioned it.
It got bounced.
Right. Yeah. Right. And that's, you know, that's how we would do it. In all honesty, I probably should have picked up on that and said, hey, but at that point, the town had already voted on it, so kind of hands are tied because I can't manipulate what your ordinance says other than adding in what it says in the guidelines. But yes, if your town required, this is, what was it? Town of Poland. There's an area in their town that they actually require 5 acres for a dwelling. Not only does it require 5 acres, but if any of the land is incorporated in a wetlands or a stream on the property, all that land gets kicked. So, you know, I went to one property, the guy had 3 acres of wetland on his property. He had a 5-acre lot, he couldn't build on it. It's like, this is kind of crazy. Like, it's a pretty big lot. I mean, but yeah, that is something we can work with for sure on that. It isn't, there isn't tons of communities out there that are more restrictive on the lot size. We're gonna say a handful, probably 15%, something like that. Most towns are, you know, keeping it at the lowest level possible so they can increase economic development within their community. So we did make a change. Well, the statute made a change to the definition of a structure. And, you know, they've included the part that's temporarily or permanently located. built or constructed or erected in support of blah, blah, blah. The reason that kind of went into play is, I'm sure some of the communities you deal with, we started to see a lot of pop-up type structures that never went away. You know, people used to put up, you know, those temporary gazebos. They have the fabric top on it, and you know, they take it down every summer, and then they like put it away, and then they bring it back. Well, what we ended up seeing is kind of like the picture on the left here, where all of a sudden there'd be a flagstone patio underneath the thing, and then the gazebo on top of it. And like, what? This is just temporary. Well, the flagstone isn't, and ultimately the gazebos stopped going away. The other thing that we ran into is the Insta shelters. It's kind of the brand name, but you know, those, whatever that type of building is called, with a tarp over the top of it. And you know, they'll use them as garages, which they're great, right? I mean, they're economical. They're good for, you know, short-term storage of stuff. The tarp typically doesn't, you know, weather all that well in Maine. But people were like, "Oh no, this is completely temporary." Like, but it's there for 10 years, and after the tarp wears off, you put metal roofing on it, and then it's there forever. So that language got inserted in there, so it's a little bit more straightforward to people. It is something we still deal with quite a bit. We get a lot of questions like, "Oh, is this just temporary structure?" Nothing temporary in shoreline zone. So if it's a structure, it's a structure. And like the bottom says, septics, wastewater disposal, that's its own thing. It has its own part of the guidelines, so you don't need to worry about that. It's not considered a structure.
What about picnic tables?
I don't really care about picnic tables.
Because I remember way back when Rich Baker was around, picnic table was a big deal.
Big deal.
Shoreline zone.
Yeah, big deal. Did he suggest people bus people for that?
I can't say for sure that he suggested busting people for it, but he was not at all a happy camper when the subject came up.
Yeah, kind of like me with the camping on a 4th of July weekend. Because I talked to Rich last week. To be honest with you, I have so much respect for the guy. When I started with the department, he was still there. He was the guy that I looked to. I wasn't doing shoreline zoning at that point, but he's the man, right? In my point of view, I'm still just keeping his seat warm, you know, and I often ask myself, you know, what would Rich do? And if I can't come up with that answer, I just call him. And as a side note, he actually reached out to me, which is super awkward because he's on the planning board in Belgrade. And he asked, he's like, "Hey, can you come out and do one of these?" Like, what? Like, what do you mean? Why would I, what? No, what? Sure, I guess. Why? He's like, "Well, nobody believes me." I'm like, I'm gonna make damn well sure they believe you after I leave. I'm gonna repeat your name like 50 times and tell them, "You see this document? He wrote it." You know, there's no reason to not believe him. He wrote it, he lived it. You know, obviously he didn't design it in the beginning, but the shoreline zoning policies that we know, they're from his fingers. Even the ones that are in 2013 and 2015, even though we've been gone for a few years. So, yeah, I remember the picnic. I get down a lot. What about picnic table? If it's there and they're moving it around, they don't put gravel under it. They don't, you know, do anything crazy with it. I don't really care. I mean, sometimes you got to make a call, right? Everybody has to make a call. And I'm sure everybody remembers the horrific situation that happened up on Rangeley Lake when the snowmobilers went through the ice and they lost their lives. Well, the town reached out to me after it all happened in the summer and said, "Hey, we'd love to put a bench at the boat landing where the families stood and sat while they were waiting for their loved ones to be recovered. Is that allowable?" I said, "Okay, where are you going to put it?" It's going to be pretty close to the water. We're gonna set it. Well, it's not gonna be set on anything, but, people are gonna sit on it, it's, we may have to put some like erosion control mulch under or something like that, because it's gonna get eroded away. But we know it's a structure. I told them straight up, like, yes, please do that, and make sure that, their memory is carried on, whether, it's through this bench that may have a lifespan of whatever. Again, it's more of a common sense call. If I get hauled into a courtroom, may I lose that case? Maybe. But I'll fall on that sword every day and twice on Sunday. Because that's, it's reasonable. And it's not like they were looking to put a giant gazebo out there in Memorial. It's a bench. And it's not the same. But I remember when my kids were leaving grade school in West Gardner, my daughter was very involved in collecting money to put what everybody kind of knows of now as a buddy bench, where, if you're a kid that's new to the school, or maybe you're feeling a little bit on the outside, and you go sit on the bench, and it kind of indicates, hey, you need a buddy. And, somebody will come sit down with you, and, maybe you make a friend. So I kind of looked at it in that same respect. Sometimes you just need a buddy. And, I know family members are going to go back and sit on that bench, and they're going to remember that day. And if we can make their life slightly easier to have a nice place to sit, I think it's reasonable. Does it follow the letter of the law? No. Do I follow all of them? No. That's fine. I'm sure everybody's got out of pocket here a couple of times, but that's absolutely fine. Another part of the structure definition that got added into is the fence poles and stuff like that for service drops. So if somebody's putting in a fence and they're running it down their property line, like a normal, like, good neighbor fence, call them that. I know that's really not why they're there, because you probably don't have the greatest neighbor. That's why you put up a fence. My grandparents out in Pleasant Pond, there was no fences. Everybody like walked back and forth, but they had really good neighbors. Not everybody has that these days. So if you're putting in a general fence where you're digging a post hole, you're dropping a post in, whether it's chain link or wooden or whatever, that's not a structure. It's fine. Maybe they need some permitting locally because they're building something, but it's not a structure that needs to meet the setback. Now, I don't know why, but for whatever reason over the last few years, there's a lot of geese around, right? I don't know why there's more geese. I don't know why they don't go anywhere. I know there's a lot less people out hunting. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe they're, I don't know, global warming, could be anything. We're starting to see a lot of people want to put fences across the front of their property, so the geese can't like walk up on their lawn and do their business. And I understand that. Daughter goes to Machias, and there's a lot of that stuff all over the sidewalks everywhere, and it's not great to step in. That is not exempt. That is looked at as a structure because it's, a blockade for wildlife. There's other mechanisms that could be employed to keep those geese at bay. Don't need to go into all of those now, but pick up a lab, let them out every once in a while. Now, usually take care of that issue. Or hire your local waterfowler. They'll also deal with that issue for you. Another part of that definition that got changed was the inclusion of wells, whether it's a geothermal well, which was all the rage there for a little while. I haven't heard a lot about geothermal in the past couple of years, but 5 years ago, it seemed like everybody wanted to put in geothermal. Water wells are the same. So in terms of the water well thing, we're trying to get septics and subsurface wastewater moved away from the resource, right? We don't want the gross water down near the resource. So thought process is you also can't have a well near your septic. So if we're pushing all the septics 100 feet back, 75 feet back, where's your well going to go? Down towards the lake or the river or the stream or the wetland, because worst case scenario, the wellhead overflows, it's just water. And, yes, it may pick up some erosion or something like that, but it's a lot better option than your septic having an issue and that getting out into the resource. I did present at a well drillers association. I've been out to a few drills, and I've only seen one that was like odd to me. The driller called it that the pipe burnt, and like what? You know, and you could tell the head pressure of the drill rig was going down. It was building pressure. It's like, oh, this one's gonna burn. I'm like, okay, and then people started moving back, so I got out of there too. Well, when the thing burnt, it actually sent a lot of sediment from the grit, from the drilling process up out of the wellhead. And amazingly enough, you know, it was 6 to 8 inches deep, right around the well itself. Fortunately, they had put up hay bales and silt fence and nothing went anywhere. So that's the only thing that I would advise folks, CEOs specifically, if you're called out to a well drilling situation, obviously not a structure, exempt, blah, 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 don't need a lot of permitting. They do still need to have proper erosion control. And that can be having a U-shape of hay bales that after the drill is done, they just load them back onto the truck. If nothing comes out of it. One of those silt socks. A lot of drillers have those on the side of their trucks now. They just pull them out and create a big U. The silt fence thing, people tend not to want to use that because to install it properly, you got to trench it, you got to backfill it, and that's a lot of work. I usually will bring this up when I start talking about silt fence. We'll probably go to the next slide.
Before we do that, we actually have a question in the
Yeah.
chat from Mike Thompson. He asked, are we talking about the 75-foot setback or the 250-foot setback?
Okay, so maybe in the chat, Mike can
Yeah, I was gonna say, Mike,
come
if you
back
wanna-
to us.
Yeah, if you want to
Um,
unmute, you can ask your question as well, or elaborate on your question.
Yeah, because the reason I think there should be a little bit of follow-up here, on a great pond, the actual setback for structures and that stuff is 100 feet in a limited residential, limited commercial district. On a river, stream, or wetland, it's going to be 75 foot for that. If the area is in resource protection, then it's 250. So the shoreline zone itself is 250 feet. The setback within that shoreline zone differentiates between what district you're located in and what resource you're on. So,
Mike, I think I saw you give a thumbs up. Does that answer your question? Thumbs up again. We're
all
good.
right, cool. I'm looking at the owl thing now. I'm realizing it has eyes on it.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. But the thing I was going to say about silt fence, this is kind of a funny aside. I've been with the department for a while. You know, my face didn't look like this at all back then. But when I was doing field services work, I was running to Rangeley one day, and I was driving by a job site and looked over, and the silt fence is just flapping in the wind. I'm like, man, that doesn't look right. That doesn't look like it's keyed in right. But I got to get to my site visit. If there's someone there, I'll stop on the way back by and say, hey, you know, what's up with your fence? So I went, did my work, came back, pulled in. There was a couple people around. I, you know, hop out of the truck, put my orange vest on. Usually when that happens, people start walking over like, what are you doing here? And I announced, you know, Colin Clark, VP, notice your silt fence here. We're just going to do a quick compliance check on it. Like, yeah, our fence is, we get like a bad batch. A bad batch. They're like, yeah, it's upside down. Like the you know, it's like they stapled it together wrong. Huh? Let's go take a look at that. So it went down. And to my surprise, the pointy ends of the stake were facing up. And just like this reaction here, I don't have a lot of ability to hold stuff in. I say stuff. It gets me in trouble. That's fine. I immediately looked at the guy and said, where's the guy with the cast? He's like, what? I was like, well, typically when you pound grade stakes in, you know, somebody's holding the stake, and, you know, either you are using like a 5-pound sludge and you're pounding it in yourself, or you've got somebody else holding the stake and somebody else is pounding it. Like, I don't know about you folks, but if you flip a nail over and you try to pound in the pointing end, the hammer likes to slip off that thing pretty easily. So I'm envisioning sledgehammer, somebody's wrist, somebody's got a cast on. The guy did not like that. Didn't appreciate it, didn't think it was funny. I was like, okay, back it up here. Like, why do you think it's like a bad batch? He's like, well, it wasn't stapled tight. Like, okay. At that point, I kind of realized this person, I'm assuming, has not been in the construction industry for very long doing land work, you know, excavating, or definitely not done it anywhere where they were worried about erosion. I was like, yeah, this is the bad batch. You got it upside down. He's like, well, it's not even stapled. He's like, what would you even do? It's not supposed to be stapled. Like, you have to dig a trench, you pull the fence tight, you pound them in, then you put the flat that's not stapled in the trench that you dug, and then you push the dirt you dug out of the trench onto the flat. That way water has to run through the fence. It's got to go through. If a mouse can run under it, water can too. That point, guy's like, huh, yeah, okay, yeah. So I got to dig all this up? Like, yeah, you're probably going to dig all this up. And unfortunately, you ruined it, so you're probably going to have to go buy more. You know, he was not very happy. But anyway, it was the funniest silt fence thing I've ever seen. I could not imagine how you got to there. Maybe it's just a bad day. I've had enough of them on my own. But the reason I mentioned that, silt fence, it's the granddaddy, right? If anybody's ever worked with Bill LaFlemme, I just know all the people that used to work at DEP and been here so long. So Bill LaFlemme was the erosion and sed guy for a long, long time. And he would always teach that class to contractors to certify people. And he said it for many, many years when I was assisting with the class. You know, silt fence is the granddaddy of erosion control. But nobody likes to install it because it's, especially around here, it's a bear, right? Tree roots, rocks. To dig that trench, to get it installed properly, a little difficult. So a lot of people have just moved to erosion control mulch. You know, you can pick it up anywhere pretty much. You lay it down 12 inches wide, 12 inches tall. As long as you don't back over it with a truck, nobody kicks it over, it's going to work really, really well. And when the job is done, you can just like, you know, spread it out, it'll deteriorate. Or a lot of times when you're building a house, if you're using it, you could scoop that stuff up, put it around the base of the house, and then go to your local Home Depot, Lowe's, or wherever you would get like legit bark mulch. Use that as the underlayment, spend half as much money mulching the place down. All you gotta do is top coat it, looks the same, nobody knows any better. It's a really good option. So, but that's my plug for erosion control mix. The other thing I would say to that is, when you're telling people like, hey, erosion control mulch might be a better thing, it's really rocky, a lot of roots around here. Everybody's, the suppliers, all those people got like a spigot on the outside of the boat. Bring a 5-gallon bucket, fill it halfway up with water, grab a couple handfuls of the mulch, throw it in the bucket. If more than 50% of it floats, don't buy it. Because when it rains, it's going to float off too. So erosion control mulch is made of stump grindings, flume grit, deteriorated wood. I don't understand how if you like cut down a tree and you like throw it in the river like the old logging days, it floats down, but you throw a stump out there, it sinks like a rock. There's some density stuff. I'm sure somebody smarter than me can, knows how that works, but it's a really good product. It works really, really well. And it's great for trails, any areas that are high impact. A lot of like nature places will use it on their trail systems when they're going down hills because it's good underfoot. So yeah, plug for that. Decks and that kind of stuff over rivers in a downtown revitalization district. This is more geared towards, when I think of this, I think of like Topsom, where, Sea Dog is out on that island, or over in Auburn where you got all those old buildings, old mills, and they want to like bring them back. Because I'm an old soul, and I hate seeing like these old historic mill buildings just fall into the rivers, because that's kind of what happens when nobody uses them over time. They deteriorate. So somebody coming in and rehabbing them, turning them into brew pubs or restaurants or museums, giving them a little bit more leeway to attach a deck cantilevered off the side of the building so they can go outside and enjoy the view of the river may keep that historical building alive a little bit longer. So the legislature and the department work together to get some of this in there. It allows for a little bit more. It's just going to be in a downtown revitalization district, so not everybody has those, but you can definitely get them. So height exemptions, the cupola thing, the widow's walk, that again, kind of like geothermals 5-10 years ago, it seemed like everybody wanted one of those. I don't see as many of them going up, but they are exempt from the height calculation if a town wants to do that. Clearly, right now, you're not measuring chimneys and antennas and that kind of stuff that's on there. But in addition to that, you could put this into your height definition and eliminate the cupolas or widow's walk or domes. They are kind of cool, but I don't know if a lot of builders are still putting them in. Price of lumber these days is kind of making some of that go away. This is a slide that seems, when I throw it up there, I'm like, oh, everybody's going to get this, but it's probably one of the top questions that we get in shoreline zoning. Because everybody will call and it's like, yeah, I got 30% impervious. Or how much impervious can I have on each lot? The guidelines doesn't say that. It's not impervious. Impervious items are like buildings and pavement, compacted surfaces. Shoreline zoning is looking at non-vegetated surfaces. So that would include those same things as well as, dirt driveways, which, like my driveway, it's definitely not impervious. I kind of wish that it was because during mud season, it's a nightmare. So water's clearly soaking into that thing. The role in this, the non-vegetated surface, is just to protect the buffer. The least amount of non-vegetated surface that you have just is cleaning the water, slowing the water down as it's migrating towards the resource. So, non-vegetated surfaces is the term. When we hear it a lot of times, people are just talking impervious, so I kind of push and pull there, like, what are we actually talking about? But that's the key there. 20% in most shoreline zone areas, 70% in the commercial fisheries, maritime, and in general development, in areas that aren't flowing to great ponds. That's your phone, not mine. I went to one of these meetings, my phone just rang out the hook. I'm like, whose phone is that? Mine. That's great. All right. So kind of what we were just talking about, non-vegetated surfaces, structures, parking areas, land previously developed, the non-vegetated part. There are some exemptions that have been added in there, which are great. Some of these communities down in this area, some of the coastal communities really benefit from this, is that naturally occurring ledge and rock outcroppings that existed. So there was a lot of situations, I was down in St. George, Cushing, where people were up against it. They're trying to just, do a legit 30% expansion in their building, but they couldn't because they were already over their lot coverage. Because they had, and can you go to the next slide, maybe it's the next one? Yep, they have this situation where, yeah, they own down to the high water mark, but, the first 25 feet is rock. They were getting penalized for that. And that's probably not ideal. So this just gives them a little bit more options to do what they need to do. I mean, what people literally were doing is those areas, they were hiring people, bringing in loam and sod and trying to cover up that rock. So it's vegetated. Well, Mother Nature just took all that money away and flushed it. There's only one other situation I ran into that, and that's why it says rock outcroppings in there. I was up in Rangeley, old development. There was a glacial erratic rock. It's just giant piece of granite. I mean, half the size of this room. I mean, it's immense. Just in the middle of the lawn. Nobody brought it there. I mean, there's no way you could have brought it there. And that impacted their ability to do stuff as well. because they were already over their lot coverage because of this giant rock. And they were considering, oh, we're gonna blast it, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. Like, you know, I'm not a geologist, but it's pretty cool. You know, it's not something you see every day. To have a giant piece of granite just sitting in your front lawn like that. Back then, before I was as old as I am now, I used to do a lot of rock climbing. So I looked at it, I was like, man, you could like, you know, boulder around that thing, like traverse around it. That'd be really cool. Your kids would probably love that. If they fell, they're gonna fall like 1.5 feet. It'd be really cool. But that provision ends up helping folks that are trapped in some of those positions where they just have this naturally occurring ledge or rock outcroppings. So functionally water dependent got updated a bit. Inclusion of, you know, fish-related storage, shoreline structures for erosion, and the one that is the bugaboo most often these days is the exclusion of recreational boat storage buildings. So we still get tons of calls on this. Well, I need to build a shed down next to the water because, you know, we got to put our kayaks in there. You just drag your kayaks up to your garage. You don't need a shed, you know, down there. Just pull them up on the shore during the summer and put them away in the winter, like most people do. The thing that gets into that as well is I grew up in Central Maine. My grandfather was the owner and developed Clark Marine in Augusta, Clark Buick, and Days Marina out in Belgrade. So I spent my days when I was really young out in Belgrade at Days Marina. My mom would probably be a little upset, you know, flipping quarters against the wall to see who would get closest, and, you know, that real low form of gambling when you're like 5 years old, but you're not really gambling, you're just trying to get a soda out of the machine, but whatever. I always thought it was the coolest thing at, you know, some Fridays we'd go out in the boat, and in that area there was a lot of really historical, you know, old wooden Chris Craft boats, you know, those boats that were built out of mahogany, they were just beautiful. Must be a nightmare to maintain. But I always thought it was cool that they literally had like garages on the edge of the lake that, you know, they'd hit the garage door open and they'd pull their boat right in there and park it just like you park your car. If people have those, the advice I always give them is maintain it. Don't let it go away. You'll never get it back. My grandparents at the property I was mentioning, they had this weird, like, perfect rectangle cut into their shoreline. And I always wondered as a kid what that was. And it was where they parked their party barge. But now I realize, probably back in the day, there was a legit boathouse there. And again, I like the old historical stuff, so don't let it deteriorate. Don't let it go away, because once it does, that's it. You can't put it back. But typically when we're talking about recreational boat storage, we're talking about the little buildings that people want to build, or they want to bring back that history and build something right on the water's edge. So if your town regulates piers, docks, and wharfs, that is an optional provision. If you do regulate it, you have to regulate it. And that is kind of a pain in the butt, and it is something that I'm going to be working on in the next version of Chapter 1000. But some changes were made to that. Like we were talking about with the individual private campsite, it used to say A, single tents, made it very clear for most. It used to say the same thing for docks. And then that was an actual court case, got in front of a judge, and they decided that singular tents was not clear enough. And they awarded judgment to this person that had 3 docks. A dock where they parked their killer boat, a dock that had their like sea-doos on it, and then another dock that the kids jumped off to swim. And I'm not talking about the swim float that's kind of out in the lake. I'm talking like 3 docks coming off the shoreline. So how it reads now is you get 1 dock per lot, unless you have double frontage. Or if you're a town that has 80,000 square feet for you know, a lot. I can't remember if you also did you require 400 feet of frontage?
300.
300 feet of frontage. So you'd be a little short. But, so if you've got 400 feet of frontage, if you're, blessed and you have a big lot like that, I mean, you could legitimately have 2 docks going out. Or you could have, in a coastal community, a dock and what they call a float haul out. So that's another structure. It's kind of been a bone of contention even within the DEP to pull your float up on in the off season to store it instead of having to truck it to the marina or bring it up around or whatever. If you have, if there's people that have, legally existing non-conformities, meaning they already have a haul out and they have a pier, that's completely fine, they keep that going. But if you're a new applicant, you get one structure below the normal height.
So if I have 200 feet of frontage, I can have a dock or a haul out, but I can't have both.
Correct. But there is a policy in place, and that's why I'm saying when we get back onto this thing, let's say you have a piece of property where you got your pier going out and you want to put a haul out in, and the haul out is put in a position where there's no vegetation. There's just either rock or gravel or whatever. Then the policy is that would be allowable, because the reason the haul out issue came to be is people typically have them a little bit more on the upland, and the vegetation underneath it, as soon as you put the float on it, it's dead. And then you get the soar on the shoreline that immediately erodes, and you lose that part of your property. People think it's going to be fine, but then 10 years later, they're like, oh, I got all this erosion. You don't have any vegetation. That's why you got all that erosion. The other thing that we're dealing with, and it may get some press here at some point, I'm part of a working group called LD 626, which is something that got put forth with the legislature, dealing with float homes is what they're calling it. Big swim floats that people build camps on and push them out wherever and live on them. And people get upset. And there's been multiple articles in multiple publications, some national publications. The one that got the most views, clicks, was one that was titled "No Permits, No Taxes Required." And it was all about a float home that was out. This one was actually in a coastal wetland, and it was a beautiful structure. Wasn't a houseboat. Wasn't even a float home with a weirdo engine on the side of it, calling it a boat. It's literally a camp on a float. The issue that has come to be with this stuff, society follows trends. So a few years ago, I don't know if I'm a TV guy, so when that show Swamp Bloggers was on, and they're out in the bayou and they're like pulling cypress up off the bottom, and people are getting like $5,000 for a stump, and people in Maine were like, oh my God, the Kennebec is full of stuff like that. We can just get out there in the Kennebec and the Penobscot, we'll just start pulling logs, and we're gonna make a myth. Well, pine and cypress are a little different, and the bottom of these rivers are regulated by the submerged lands people, so it wasn't quite as easy to do. Well, then comes the show Swamp People, the guys that are out there alligator hunting, which, again, I watched that show. I think it's not all about the alligator hunting, but I think the personalities on the show are comical, and it's a good brain dead waste of an hour, to be perfectly blunt. Well, down in Louisiana, there's tons of those, because a lot of their land is wetland and in the bayou. The difference there versus here is they have companies, kind of like Blow Brothers and the Porta Potty people, on boats. So they come around to your camp on the bayou, and you have a big black water and gray water system underneath your camp, and they pump you out once a month, once in 2 months, once a season, however much it is. We don't have that. We don't have that at all. There's no pump out boats anywhere. You know, you can pump out a marina, but, you know, you're not gonna take your float home into the marina to do that. So it raises a couple of questions. One of them is super gross. The other one is a little bit less gross. Where is the water going? If you're staying at a camp, somebody's gonna have to go to the bathroom. Where's that going? The hope is you have a composting toilet in there. The reality is you have a hole in your floor. Leading to the gross part. You're then sending your kids and family and you're like, hey, jumping off the camp into the water, and like, yucky. So that's an issue that we're currently dealing with. I just dealt with one this summer. Leave the names out of it. Yeah.
Leave the names out of it. Ralph Noah from South Bristol.
Yep.
We had a landowner that was gonna move in a houseboat. I think it got stuck in Belfast because of all the flack he got in the town of South Bristol. Where it is now, we don't have a clue, but it never showed up this past summer. And we wasted a lot of time, you know, and we never developed a real conclusion of what was gonna happen.
Yeah. Yep.
Still up in the air.
Yep.
So what is the situation where a boat is used as a rental unit, tied to a dock, doesn't leave the dock?
Legit boat?
Yeah, I don't know that, frankly, I don't know if it's registered, but it doesn't, they don't take it out and drive it around, as far as I know.
So, as the rule is currently, if the vessel is registered with IF&W and they're hanging their placard and their registration on it, then shoreline zoning, local ordinances, we can't touch it. Now, there's, down in this area, obviously, this is a hot topic because right that way, across the bridge, there was a proposal a few years ago that long pier that came out over there, that, you know, there was gonna be whatever, 15 cabins on the side of that thing. And that got squashed. A lot of communities down in this area have actually put in regulations into their ordinance itself. Because again, you can be more restrictive than the guidelines, you just can't be less, that eliminate that specifically say floating homes, floating camps, residential dwellings built on a pier, a dock, are not allowed. Although Chapter 1000 already does say that, which is why I got sucked into that LD 626 group, and probably why my group will end up regulating these things. Because we already have that language in there. You can't build a residential structure on a pier, dock, or wharf. Whether it's out in the lake, tied to a dock, whatever, it's not legitimate. Now, with that being said, leaving the names out of it, I got a person in central Maine on Annabessica who has a bunch of Airbnbs, and he has a camp built on a dock that I visited this summer, and it's like a building as big as this table, this whole setup, and he had a 50-pound thrust trolling motor. The building probably weighs, I don't know, 12,000 pounds. You got a 50-pound thrust motor on it with the wires cut off from it, no battery, but he's got the IF&W placard on it. And I was like, geez, I don't know, it doesn't look like a boat. And I'm pretty sure I know what a boat looks like. It doesn't look like one. He's like, well, no, they said it was fine, I could maneuver it. I'm like, with what? He's like, well, the trolling motor, we move it. Like, it'd take you 3 days to go 3 feet. There's no way. I mean, it'd be easier for me to get out and swim and push it. And I'm not a good swimmer. So no. Well, long story short, we got the game wardens involved because they're part of this working group too. And they're looking into what can actually be registered as a vessel to deal with some of these non-boat registered items. Well, the game wardens went out to investigate the location, and the guy put, I should have brought it, well, it's on my computer, but he put a transom next to the entry door and put a 25 horse Evinrude on the side of it. And the game wardens went out to inspect it, and it was a tiller. So he's literally like this, looking out the door, driving this thing around at, 2 miles an hour. And I brought that video to this working group, and they're like, no. Like, to be a vessel, you got to have line of sight. You got to be able to have like 180 degrees of vision. You hanging this way when you're going this way, steering your boat is not legitimate. So more to come on that. I am sure it will be in the news because there's big players involved with this. And like I said, there's a lot of articles that have been written about these things. We're talking about, $50,000, $100,000 structures. Some of them are really nice, and I'm sure they have, good wastewater and all that stuff. But we need to figure that out. And I'd always said that these things are going to be a problem until somebody puts one where, there's somebody important that can see it. And that's exactly what happened. They put one out on a lake in front of somebody's place that wasn't going to put up with that. And all of a sudden we got a working group and we're looking to make some changes. But there's a lot of them out there, and you'd be surprised. Actually, when you're heading up through Topsom and you get the river, when you get there, that Topsom bypass dealie to Brunswick, there's one right there.
That one's been there forever.
It's been there for a bit.
Yeah.
Yep.
I was
Not a
wondering
boat.
about that.
Yep, there's
Yeah.
one, I live in West Gardner on near Horseshoe Pond. I can hear the loons, but I can't see them. Tax is a little cheaper, I guess. But there's a gazebo. It's a dock gazebo. There's a dock that has a bunch of outhouses on it. It's on an island. Again, there's no pump out people. Where's that going? Super gross. But anyway, I think we have more pictures of those maybe. Coming up, I guess. Shoreline stabilization is a big deal, right? Whether you're on a lake, river, or coastal wetlands, the ocean. Erosion is a real thing, and shoreline stabilization has made its way into Chapter 1000, therefore it can get into your local ordinance. The reason I say this is because a lot of times when people do stabilization work, a lot of trees disappear. And that's a problem. So it gives communities a little bit more oversight on this. You can require different things, like, hey, you can install this rock to stabilize your bank. We think it's a great deal. We don't want your land to erode, but instead of cutting down 40 trees to install the rock, you're going to come in by barge, which is something that there's a lot of companies, Procter Marine, a lot of companies that do that. And it saves the vegetation up on the shoreline. Limited removal of vegetation. If they do have to remove stuff, then you got to replant. Along with this, I'm trying to connect within the DEP. There's two different rules that are in play a lot of times. You got the Natural Resources Protection Act, which is administered and enforced by the DEP, and then you have your local shoreline zone, right? So when I explain it, it's like your vehicle. To be legitimate to drive on the roads of Maine, you need to be registered and inspected. Two different laws regulating the same piece of equipment. That's shoreline zoning and NERPA. Everybody's regulating the first 75 feet, the first 100 feet, but they're doing it in different ways. So we're trying to mesh that together a little bit more. So when somebody sends in a stabilization project, a pier project, something like that, the review comes over to me or to staff, shoreline zoning staff, to look it over And that came to be because of a great CEO I've worked with for a long, long time, Terry Brackett down in St. George. He called me out on it. I mean, straight up. You know, he called in, said, hey, I'm looking at this permit. These people removed 35 trees to put in their riprap. He's like, the site looks great in terms of stabilization. He's like, but shoreline zoning wise, it's a mess. Like, all the trees are gone. I'm like, yeah, sorry, Terry. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess we're gonna have to get some replanting going, something like that. He's like, well, you know, how does this happen? He's like, you know, you guys are the experts. You know, how does that even happen? How does it go in front of you at the DEP and it's legitimate to remove all these trees that are clearly in violation of shoreline zoning? I'm like, yeah, it's a good point, Terry. I'm not involved with the permitting, so I don't know. Let me look into it a little bit. He's like, so the people that are writing the permits, they're like in a different building? No, Terry, no, we're in the same building. He's like, oh, they're on a different floor. Like, no, Terry, they're not. And at that point, the light bulb went off. Like, no, Terry, they sit like 15 feet from me. He's like, exactly. You guys are the experts. You're reviewing the things. And now people are coming to the town, holding up their permits, saying, we got a DEP approval, and then the town can't do anything. It's not correct. The most restrictive rule applies. 99% of the time, it's the local ordinance that is the most restrictive. So if you see a permit coming across your desk for shoreline stabilization, and it includes the removal of a bunch of trees, and you only see half of them going back, quarter of them going back, none of them going back, that's a no. If you're reviewing it at the planning board level, you're assisting as a CEO to the planning board, point it out. This is not compliant with shoreline zoning, and in the standard conditions of a NERPA permit, it says that all state, local, and federal rules have to be followed for this to be compliant. Not following the local rules. It's up to the town to stand up for themselves in that regard. How I've kind of stepped into that is now when those permits come in, they can send them over to me. When I see things that aren't right, I have a review sheet that I write, and Jess knows this fairly well because she does a lot of licensing through the years. I have a whole list, essentially a template, and I'm just cut and paste stuff in. Like, this is compliant with Chapter 1000, no vegetation removal, good to go. Or this is not consistent with Chapter 1000. They're removing 15 trees. They're only replanting 4. This would not be compliant with shoreline zoning. I can't speak for the town. At that point, I immediately get on the phone with whoever at the town I can get and say, hey, there's a permit application in the door. You guys need to be aware of this. They're removing a bunch of veg. It's not going to be compliant. You don't need to approve this. Make them replant. And it's worked pretty well. It's eliminated 90% of that stuff, I think. Now licensors are reaching back out to the consultants, and they're requiring them to put the replanting standards back on the plan. A lot of them have a standard note in there that any vegetation removed will be replaced in compliance with the local standards, which passes muster with me because it's a hook. If they don't do it, the town can go to the plan and say, you wrote this, you didn't do this, you're in violation. So something to keep in mind. If you start seeing that stuff happen in your community, reach out, shoot me an email. Love to know about it. That way we can kind of curb that behavior. I love that people can stabilize their shoreline. I don't want it to erode them. I don't like when people use that to then open up a view shed that they didn't have. It's not legal. I mean, if it's legal, it's legal. If it's not, it's not.
We get at least 30 of these a year down in Harpswell.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it's totally endless.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
In what cases would the planning board review? You wrote planning board review on there.
Yep.
In what cases would a planning board review shoreline stabilization?
So if the town of Harpswell specifically has, in your piers, docks, wharfs section, if it's updated, it will say piers, docks, wharfs, other items below the normal high water line, and shoreline stabilization. That's your hook in. The other hook in is when they do shoreline stabilization work, it's guaranteed that they're bringing in more than 10 cubic yards of material. So at that point, the town also has the ability to review that permit because they're moving more than 10 cubic yards. And if, as part of their project, they're removing vegetation in excess of the standards, they have to replant. Or you deny the permit, say, hey, can you do it with a barge? Can you go down over the edge in a coastal wetland situation? You know, work a low tide where you create an access point, bring in some rubber blast mats, go down over the edge during low tide, pack your rock, walk your machine back up off the rubber mats, pull your mats with you, and then restore that. I don't know, I'm saying this, but excavators obviously go wider than that, 12-foot wide swath going down. Yeah, so, but again, the system that's in place at the DEP is not perfect. Nothing is, right? But this is very imperfect. In the central Maine office that I work out of in Augusta, most, if not all, of the licenses that involve these kind of activities come to me. I don't know, that isn't the way it's happening in some of the other regional offices. So if your town, anybody's town, that is dealing with a southern Maine type of office, it's not, or the permits are being handled and people aren't getting the review, let me know, because I want to make sure that happens. With that being said, when an application comes in for shoreline stabilization work, the applicant has to send in 7 copies? 7 copies. So one of those copies is DEP, one goes to Army Corps, archaeological, IFW, blah, 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 municipality.
Yeah. So
you're supposed to get those. And as part of that review, a review sheet should be coming to the town. The problem is, it doesn't always get to the person that actually could do the review. It may just go to the clerk. And they're like, what is this? I don't know what this is. All right, we're gonna put it in this one. And that's a problem. I've worked over the years to try to develop a better email list for all the CEOs, so they're actually getting put to the CEO or planning board chair or somebody that's actually gonna review it. But kind of like DEP land, the turnover in the CEO game is extensive sometimes. So if you're like CEO at harpswell@gmail.com, because you set that up, and then you say, hey, I don't like CEO game, or I got a better opportunity over here, the next CEO isn't going to have that email, so it doesn't end up getting to the right spot.
Yeah.
So let us know. We'll try to track down.
All of these review responsibilities, I think, are great for the planning board, but it suggests to me that it addresses an issue you raised initially. Why aren't planning board certified?
That's,
I mean, I lived in Virginia for a long time, and I was on 2 planning boards, and we were certified by the state of Virginia.
right.
It's a long course, year-long course we took. I think you get better decisions. It creates sort of a tension between the CEO and the planning board that I think is unnecessary.
I agree.
In
And
a
why is
small
that?
town, that's untenable.
It's
Why is it untenable?
I mean, I think, well, when you're in Virginia, I don't often ask a lot of, when I'm out in the field, I don't ask a lot of questions I don't already know the answer to, because I'm trying to catch people lying. So, but down in Virginia, were you compensated?
Yes,
Planning board members, are you compensated
yes.
here?
Yeah.
Wow.
$20 a meeting,
Well, $20 a what?
a meeting,
A meeting, okay.
regardless of how long, 5-hour meeting, $20.
We get $300 a
13-minute
year.
meeting, $20.
$3 a year?
Yeah.
Wow, you're just living that. Look at you. Extra
About penny an hour.
It's 30 more than me.
Yeah, well, right. I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you. You guys may be the exception, because I asked that same question, and everybody's like, no, what? Who do you think we get paid? Like, no, they don't get paid. So that's usually the issue that I've run into, is you're talking about people that aren't being compensated, so therefore they don't necessarily want to go get more training. But I agree. you're right on point. The unnecessary tension between those entities, because I'll be honest with you, I've worked with a ton of CEOs through the years, and the good ones, if they end up in a community that has a not so great planning board, town manager, appeals board, select board, they blow. They're out there. And they're not going to stick around for that, because when the rubber meets the road, let's say I'm a CEO in a town that, you got to select, because typically the select board is the boss of the CEO, right? They're the ones who essentially employ the CEO. Well, if you're in that small town politics thing where, hey, we know Buddy, and Buddy's a nice guy, so we're going to let Buddy build that shed down next to the water so we can store his kayaks in there, and you're a good CEO, and the CEO's going, no, you can't do that. It's going to set back 100 feet. You can't do that. Like, no, it's fine. It's just Buddy. It's fine. Just sign the permit. That's the issue. Because ultimately, it's the CEO that has to sign, saying that it's in compliance. And a good CEO won't do that. But it's problematic because that CEOs are compensated. And are you willing to lose your job because you're toeing the line? That's what it comes down to. And some CEOs are in a position where, hey man, I need this job. This is how I pay my mortgage. So if 3 times a year I got to sign a permit that for Buddy, okay, my mortgage isn't paying itself. It takes a unique person to be able to, leave a job like that. And then you have the other situation where some CEOs have 4 or 5 towns because they're only in your town for 4 hours a week and once a month for a planning board meeting. And that's a difficult game to play as well. So you had a question first?
Yes. The relationship of your organization to the Army Corps, where you are overlapping, where are you working on delegated responsibilities, where they insist on stepping in as the first player?
So the Army Corps is a unique situation for us. They're obviously federal. We're state. They do step in sometimes. I actually learned something the other day that, when somebody's doing a wetland impact type of project, apparently now, if you exceed 5,000 square feet of impact, the Army Corps hops in and they require an in lieu fee, which basically you're paying per foot for impact. And the DEP, you can impact up to 15,000 square feet, and you may have to do in lieu fee in there as well, but it doesn't kick in quite as that fast. Army Corps, for me, in terms of what I've done in my career at the department, hasn't been all that involved unless there's been significant violations that impacted wetlands or water resources. And I can only remember one case where they would really inserted themselves in there, and they came in yeah, we're gonna do it. And then they didn't. And that left us in a little bit of an issue enforcement-wise. But I think it's fair to say they kind of pick and choose on the violation side of things. They're definitely involved in all the reviews for a license project when resources or waterways are involved. But there is an overlap there on the licensing side of things. There's less of an overlap, but more of a joint effort on some enforcement cases that would happen under the Natural Resources Protection Act rather than shoreline zoning.
Did the recent Supreme Court, concurring with that, this was a Montana case, change the definition of waters of the United States as far as you guys are concerned?
I don't know. Do you know anything about that?
It changed them slightly, but not like what we deal with. So they, I think, just kind of envelope things differently, but it's a little messy, just like the 5,000 square foot thing. so not much really changed on their jurisdictional review. I think they changed wording more than what they reviewed and encompassed, so.
So is it fair to say that their aspect of how they regulate is changed, but their increased regulation doesn't necessarily impact how we're doing business at the DEP, but it does give them an opportunity to step in more often? But I'm gonna have to read up on that one, because I love me some Montana. If I could get out of here and go somewhere else, I'd be knee deep in a stream out there.
I thought the definition of waters of the US was totally decreased. I mean, it has to be connected.
That was,
So it's
that
not,
particular
it's not
case.
that they have additional authorities, they have less.
I don't know if that's correct, because back in the beginning, waterways was looked at as something that you can float a boat down. And they're involved in wetlands, and you are not floating a boat in a wetland.
That was their original.
Well, unless it's a duck habitat wetland, you can do it there.
Rivers and Harbors Act of 1999. Now, that's where the focus was, but then it expanded.
Right. Yeah, and the Clean Waters Act was kind of a spin-off of that, so it's all that spider web going out from the original law.
But I think it's just been pulled back in.
I'll have to look at it a little bit more. I mean, I know when I was notified about the wetland impact thing, I was almost floored, because in the state of Maine, if you impact less than 4,300 square feet of a wetland that is not a wetland of special significance, meaning it's not an open water wetland, it's not within the shoreland zone, it's not a special wetland, it's just a normal garden variety wetland, like 60% of the state of Maine is forested wetland. 4,300 square feet you can impact without a permit at all, it's exempt. But somehow now, if you impact 5,001 square feet, you could be on the hook for, the numbers they were talking about was like $4 a square foot. So that's $20,000. So you go from being exempt to owing $20,000, and you haven't even got above a tier 1 permit in the DEP's eyes, because tier 1, it's a little squirrely. Yeah.
Yes. We've had hemlock infestation
Yeah.
and professionally harvested forests are gone.
Yep.
Because of it.
Yep.
Who watches the shoreland zone area in the future where that harvesting has been done?
Right.
As far as drainage ways and, deterioration of the.
Yeah.
land.
It's a hot topic. Whether it's hemlock, the thing I've been hearing a lot lately, given that brown tail is like a thing, it's definitely a thing. But exactly, and we had a big infestation on my property, and I'm praying that the crown of our oak trees come back, because it's been 2 years and they haven't, and they're huge, and I don't really know how we're going to deal with them on our property. And I've went to other properties where it's been disease or beetles or whatever that are impacting them. It's something that actually we're going to get some slides here in a minute or two, I think. When you're talking about dead, diseased, dying trees, if they have a target, they're a hazard tree. If you have a forester come in, an arborist, and they deem that those are hazards, which most of the time they are, unless they're just going to fall on nothing. But the shoreline zone, there's usually stuff: boats, properties, docks, houses, camps, whatever. Then they legitimately can be removed. They do need to be replanted. So I think what we're going to see, to get back to your question, is kind of transition from these tree species that are being impacted, and what we're going to end up seeing in a lot of these shoreland areas where we would normally see spruce and hemlock and cedar haven't been impacted. Bugs don't like cedar at all. But you're going to see that transition if you're going to go with those kind of trees. You're going to see cedars being moved into those areas when they replant, because they're going to hold up pretty well in a wet environment. Or the red maples, things of that sort are going to be kind of coming in. So I think transitionally over time, that's what you're gonna see. And it will be the local folks that are gonna be requiring that transition, because, you know, if you do approve hazard tree removal because of dead design, diseased or dying, there's gonna be some replanting that's gonna need to be done. And coming up with native trees to Maine that are gonna survive well in that area. Typically in the shoreline zone, you're thinking wet feet, even though the ground may be nice up at, you know, your foot level. Down below, it's kind of equal to the water table. So that's why you see a lot of climax communities such as Pine, right along shorelines. Deal with a lot of camp owners that have big pine trees on their property. And you go out to the property and they've got all these, they're referred to as buttress roots. So they're the root system that's trying to get away from the water. So they're actually on top of the surface. Now, a lot of that comes from erosion over time, but they're legitimately right on the top. And that's why you see a lot of blowdowns in these areas. Instead of like taking up a giant root ball, it's like 15 feet wide and the thing just like pops up because of that root system. So my guess, you know, looking into the crystal ball, is you're going to see a transition from some of those tree species that are being impacted to the cedars and the maples out there to replace them. Now, in terms of the brown tail specifically, it's a problem. But you're gonna be hard pressed to find an arborist to come out and say the tree is dead, diseased, or dying because of brown tail. You know, if they get impacted and they get defoliated and they've been that way for a few years, yeah, they're probably not going to come back. And like I said, I'm hoping, you know, one of my trees is like 85% back, one of them not so much. But brown tails typically aren't a situation where you're going to get a dead, diseased, or dying definition coming from an arborist. With that being said, I'll throw this out there, and it may be on a slide in the future. Something I always suggest to communities, CEOs, planning boards, if you've got somebody coming in and saying, hey, we got a dead, diseased, dying hazard tree. We've had our arborist come out, they cored the tree, they looked at it, they said, yes, it's a hazard. What I recommend to folks is make sure that the arborist or forester that makes the call is not the same person that's going to be firing up the chainsaw. There's an economic incentive. Not saying that everybody would do this. Definitely not, because there's a lot of good, legitimate people out there. But there's an economic incentive for folks to say something is one thing when maybe it's on the edge of being that, because it's a few $1,000s to have a tree cut down. I was going to have some trees cut down on my property. So we had a bunch of pine trees right next to the house when we bought it. We had a guy come out, it was like $3,000 a tree. We just bought the house. I'm like, I don't know. I don't want the trees poking holes in my roof, but at the same time, I'm not paying $9,000 for you to cut down some trees. So just keep that in mind.
We had 2 leaf outs in South Bristol last year.
Yep.
And we actually did get some acorns from some of the oak trees.
Yep.
They was very small.
Very small.
I watched one oak tree, and within 3 years' time, it's gone.
Yeah.
Which isn't good.
Just it's a bad deal, and I mean, I love our oak trees. I hate it in the fall because they hold onto their leaves like twice as long as the maple, so I'm raking my darn lawn like 4 times.
Thank you.
And I don't know why all those leaves always end up in the gutter, because all of them seem to be in the gutter too. But it's challenging. But I hate to see when I was a kid, my sister got her start in state government working on the spruce budworm project up in the county. And, that was crazy, all those trees that were lost. But it's natural selection. I don't know if we're, as humans, are having some impact in that, but it has happened through the years. It's just, it's just weird, the stuff that's happening. I mean, I never heard of ticks when I was a kid. I never heard of brown tails. Never heard of any of this stuff. My kids know about it. They've been itchy. Ticks on them. So. All right, so we'll blaze through some of these rather quickly to make up some time. This is in this is on Hadley Pond in Machiasport or East Machiasport or something Machiasport. One of those camps I was talking about. You can clearly see, this is like a swim float with the 55-gallon drums underneath it with camp on it. They had it out there. They couldn't figure out a way to get it off the lake. So they pulled it onto that little beach area back there in the winter, thinking, oh, we'll just leave it here. They forgot about ice. And that thing is now a pile of rubble over on the side. So that presents the next problem of these structures. When they can't get them off, the ice gets them, it's a wrap. I don't know, there's a guy up in Moosehead that has one out in the middle of the lake, and it's in year round. He rents it as an Airbnb in the summer and then an ice camp in the winter. I think it's in an LUPC, so we haven't been able to touch it, but it's another one that we deal with. So, all right, so these are the ones that are near my house. So this is the gazebo, and down on the right, and these are the porta potties, which, again, it's on a dock. What are you doing? Why? I mean, you're on an island. What are we doing here? It's mind-numbing, really. So, I think I took those pictures. General gazebo thing. Oh, it's a temporary structure. It's all, bolts and wing nuts. We just take it apart. Okay, great, take it apart. Get it out. Fine. Certified contractor stuff. That's another thing that went into Chapter 1000. Basically states that if you're moving more than a cubic yard of material and you're going to be working within the shoreline zone, you need to be certified. And you need to come to the DEP. You need to meet with John McLean, who teaches the class, who issues the certification to work in the shoreline zone. So if you don't have that in your ordinance, I would strongly suggest you get that in your ordinance. It's a little blurb. It is optional. I don't like that it's optional. I don't know why it should be optional. It's statutory. But it's pretty easy to put in there. And the only thing that towns really need to do after it goes in their ordinance is on your shoreline zoning application. If the applications are printed out and you got to stack them, that's fine. Get a little label writer thing and just stick a label on it and say certified contractor name and number. And that isn't to say when someone applies, they need to have that in hand, because they're often bidding out jobs and trying to figure out who they're going to get and all that stuff. But once the permit is issued, you want to have who they're going to be using, what their certification number is, and that way when the town goes out to inspect, they know that that person is certified. They know how to put silt fence in right side up. Nobody's got a cast. And the bottom here is the pictures of the erosion control mulch that we were talking about. You can kind of see that one on the left. You got a lot of, you got that rill of water carrying sediment down to that berm. And you can kind of see that delta that's on the backside of that berm where all the sand is dropped out of it, which is pretty amazing how well that works, to be honest with you. And it does allow water to pass. It just gets through a little bit slower, allows stuff to settle out. So when we're talking about an excavation contractor, there's a definition that goes in your definition section. It does exclude, municipal, state, and federal employees conducting work as part of their employment, timber harvesting, farmers, and homeowners doing their own work. So if you can get out and, do your own work, you can do that. You don't need to be certified. You still need to follow the erosion and sedimentation controls. You need to have your fence up, your mix, or whatever. But you don't need to be certified. Now, what does it necessarily mean to be a contractor? It means you're getting paid. And it could be barter and trade. Probably like if it's your buddy and you buy him a 6-pack of pizza, I don't think that's really payment. But, if you're trading services or making payment, that's, a paid contract. So, but the long and the short of it, if you're doing your own work, you don't need to worry about it. I remember taking this picture a long time ago as well. This was on the side of Sabatis Pond. It was the first time I'd seen a house lifted and a new foundation put under it, so close to the water. Really crazy to see. There was like a skid steer up underneath there. I couldn't believe it. But in terms of the standards that are in there, the reconstruction standards, they've been in Chapter 1000 for a long time, but it's just kind of that reminder. If your structure is damaged or removed for whatever cause by more than 50% of the structure, that's when you hop into greatest practical extent review. You're looking at relocation of the structure. Can you move it to a more conforming location? Now, that doesn't mean you're going to get all the way outside 100, because a lot of these properties have been built up. There's a septic back there, your well's back there, your garage is back there. Maybe you can only move it back 10 feet. 10 feet's important. It's a little bit more buffer. And that's what shoreline zoning is all about. You know, we don't care so much about the structures, besides the size. We're more there for the trees and the buffer to make sure that the water is clean, because ultimately that's what makes your property valuable and keeps your tax base at a good level. Your water quality declines, your tax base goes down, and all of a sudden you're got a China Lake situation, and that's no good. Yeah.
Suppose you have a situation where it's leave it where it is, you know, move it a foot.
Yep.
Or take down 3 trees and move it 30 feet. How do you decide? How do you decide?
I take down the 3 trees because when you move it back, there's language within your ordinance, within the Chapter 1000 guidelines that states when you move your structure back from that location, the location that the structure previously existed has to be revegetated with all levels of vegetation: ground cover, shrubs, and trees. So if you lost 3 trees out back and you can put 5 trees, 2 shrubs, and some good ground cover, it's going to be a win for the buffer.
And in the particular case I'm thinking of, what the house is on was that rocky ledge, like that one picture you showed. There was no vegetation there. There is no vegetation that's going to stay there.
Right. Yeah. Then you're into that site-specific situation where you got to make a call. So if there's no chance of you getting better veg to grow there, and it's a foot, 30 feet, losing 3 big trees, I'm probably leaning towards the foot. And ultimately, the thing that kind of plays into that as well is if you do have the new non-conforming structures expansion section, if your structure is that close, they're actually not going to be able to expand it that much. So there may actually be an economic incentive for them to move back, because then once you're outside 25 feet, you get a bigger place. So a lot of that comes to, you know, the applicant, what they want to do. But ultimately, that is a situation in which the planning board or its designee, the way it's written, has to just make a call. And, you know, as long as the call is consistent, I'm cool.
And who decides 50% of the market value?
Yes, that's a great question. That's another thing I would like to see if we can get out of Chapter 1000. I don't like the market value thing. I don't. I came from the NERPA side of things doing field services work where it was 50% of the structure. If you've got a 100-foot wall and you remove 51 feet, that's more than 50%. Very easy. Market value is tough, because market value, my background at college, my degree is resource economics and environmental policy. So I got a lot of economics, and the numbers thing I understand really, really well. And market value is equivalent to willingness to pay.
Very subjective.
Very subjective. And as we have all seen over the last 3 years, something that used to be worth $150,000 is now selling for $350,000. So it isn't going to take much to get you into some situations here, because if now all of a sudden the property is worth $350,000, but you can take off like 75% of the structure because it's only going to cost you $100,000 to put it back, it's less than 50%. So that's an issue. Now, not to get all super economic nerdy on you here. There is a process within economics that is called regression analysis, where you take out all the factors except the thing you're looking at. So when I was in school, we did a project on the Great Meadows Game Preserve down in Massachusetts, and we were looking at property values as you moved each mile away from the game preserve. In that area, every mile that you got closer to the reserve, your property went up by $4,000 or $5,000. In Maine, it's a little different. Once you get out into the woodsy stuff, your property values tend to, go down a little bit. If you're in downtown Portland, your property value is going way up. The long and the short of it is there are people out there that do market value assessments, that do it in such a way that only looks at the structure, not the land, not anything else besides the structure. So if you were in Harpswell, Maine, and you had a 2,100 square foot house, that structure in that town, regardless of location, is worth a certain amount of money. It takes out being in the shoreland zone. It takes out being 25 feet away from the resource. It takes out being out in the backwoods. So the suggestion I always have for people is to talk to some realtors and talk to some folks that do those kind of assessments. I would like to see it in the perfect world. I would like to see it reviewed on one of two ways. Either 50% of the structure comes down, or instead of using market value, maybe go to the assessed value, because I think that may be, because the assessed value only looks at the structure, because when you do your assessment, it's land and the structure, but that's not perfect either, because in West Gardner, when they do my property tax assessment, there's a guy that rides in a pickup.
Yep.
He pulls in my driveway.
Snaps a couple pictures.
He don't even do that. I barely see him looking out the window. He just rolls out. And it's West Gardner and it's West G. It's not really, taxes are cheap, the laws are few. It's got a good school. But it's challenging, right? Because assessors may not be equal in every community. How often they do the assessments may not be equal. But market value is so subjective, even more subjective than the assessed value typically.
And it's an answer that we can get in-house.
Correct.
That would be huge for us, because
Correct.
we sit around and have to explain to people, Tim, he's also from Hartford, what it is to be market value. Like, you have to go get a realtor to give you the answer, because we can't help you find the answer.
Right. And we had one of those, a few slides ago, there was a picture of that gazebo that was down next to the shoreline. Some guy called in, I don't know, it was 5 years ago now, and said, hey, yeah, we got to do some work on this gazebo. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, right. It's like, well, we got it market value at, 120,000. Like, what kind of gazebo you got? 3 bedroom, 2 bath? What are we talking about here?
Gold fixtures.
A gazebo? He's like, no, it's just a regular gazebo. We had the, realtor come out and they gave us an assessed value of 120 grand because it's, 4 feet from the water. I'm like, of course they did, because they included proximity to the water. Like, is it the same gazebo that you go up to basically and buy at Lowe's and they deliver it, or the, rent to own place? He's like, yeah, it's like one of those. I'm like, okay, well, hold on. Lowe's.com. Yeah, it's worth 5 grand. 5 grand instead of 120. Like, okay, you have to take out all those other factors. And I agree. We got to tweak that. we got to figure that out, because, like I said, these days, market value is, oh my God, it's just so skewed. My mother-in-law is a realtor, and this year it's not as lucrative, but the end of 2020, 2021, 2022, banner years. People are, you list something for 200 grand and people are walking in with a cash offer of 250. It's just not realistic. So it is something to work out. Sorry, I don't have a better answer. But
question.
Yeah.
A lot of your comments have been related to Chapter 1000.
Yes.
Our town has not adopted Chapter 1000.
Okay, what do you got?
We got our local ordinance.
So,
Are we gonna have to do chapter 1,000 eventually, or we just stay where we're at?
so your local, what town?
With Ben Harbor?
Okay. Sorry to chuckle. I've been to your town a few times. Every time I go down and pitch adopting it, it falls on deaf ears. Yes, eventually you will, for sure. And some parts of your ordinance down there are more restrictive already. Some parts of your ordinance are dated and not as restrictive. You got Jeff down there who does a good job. I talk to him a lot. But ultimately, yes, you're gonna need to get up to where you need to be. It's always gonna be your ordinance. The reason I say chapter 1,000 so much is because that's the only thing I can really comment on. You know, if you say someone from Booth Bay Harbor comes in and, you know, they're like, I saw Jeff. He said we're out of compliance with section 36.25. You know, I don't know. And, you know, I'll look up your ordinance and get to that section and be like, sorry, I can't help you. It's not part of the guidelines. It's something the municipality has put in place that either goes above and beyond or is their own local stuff. But yes, statutorily, all towns are supposed to be at the level of chapter 1,000 at a minimum. Unfortunately, every time I've come down to town and kind of said, hey, you know, let's go fluoride, let's get rid of fluoride volume, let's get the footprint and height, let's get this hazard tree stuff in there. It hasn't taken, which, you know, that's fine. It's not mandatory right now, but it will happen.
Any timeline on that? Are you talking 6 months, 6 years?
It won't be 6 years. It won't be 6 months either. In previous versions of Chapter 1,000, it was the Board of Environmental Protection that initiated or mandated adoption. It'd be interesting to see if Booth Bay Harbor is up to speed with 2010. I can't remember. That would have been Rich Baker dealing with it. But now I think it's the commissioner that gets to mandate whether it's mandatory or not. We've had in-house conversations because every 4 years we're supposed to look at Chapter 1,000 to see if we're going to update it again. And what we have right now seems to be working pretty well. I haven't heard anybody that has adopted it that's coming in saying, hey, this is awful. Like, it's made our town just ridiculously hard to deal with. Most people are like, wow, this has made a big difference in a positive way. Just the fluorine volume thing is, you know, the biggest thing because it's difficult. The conversations we've had with the commissioner is, I don't want to rip open Chapter 1,000 again, although there are some tweaks I would like to see made. The market value thing, there's some definitions that are screwed up. There's a couple citations that don't line up properly. And there's some other things that we need to add from statute. Like statutorily, they added the photographic record piece that when you submit a permit now, you're supposed to send pre-photos and post-photos of your activity, just like you would if you got a permit by rule from the department or you got a full license. geared towards inland towns that have no coastal. A version that removes timber harvesting. So you're an option one town, you completely rip in. A version that repeals inland waterfowl wading bird habitat as being part of resource protection. In 2006, that was mandatory. In 2010, it got pulled. And a lot of towns are figuring out whether they still want to be. The reason I say that is if your town, but yours is gonna be a little different because your document is. It's a lot, okay? And I understand you get a general land use ordinance and you've encapsulated everything. I would rather see towns that have that, have a chapter that is like shoreland zoning. And then it's just all shoreland zoning in chapter 2 or whatever, and all the definitions within that only apply to shoreland zoning, so you're not like. Cause when you get into a 300 pager, messages get lost, people get confused. And if you could break it up a little bit, and then maybe that's just me, I'm kind of like that. It makes it a little bit more user friendly. So if a town, you're a town, you reached out and said, hey, yeah, we would like to adopt. What can you help us with? I can have that thing sent to you in 5 minutes. And literally, if you didn't have a big general land use ordinance, it's a glorified Mad Lib because you will literally put your name on the header and footer. You'll fill in the date in which you adopt. You'll fill in the date in 12C3 where your minimum lot size went to 40,000 and 200, or a minimum of that, which is 1992-ish. And bam, away you go. And I know, like, some of the, council of governments and those folks, and there's consultants out there that charge municipalities to update ordinances and keep them updated and stuff like that. Ours costs $0.00. Literally nothing. The only thing we can't do right now, which I'm really bummed about, and I've been really trying hard, but I just can't find the right person to help me do it, is we can't produce maps. Really good shoreline zoning maps. I want to be able to produce a base shoreline zoning map that is just based off of the basic version of chapter 1000. If the town wants to be more regulatory and regulate other things within their community, they would need to go to a map maker and do that. But our GIS software, our GIS staff was a staff of 4 people. We're down to 1. And that guy is chasing PFAS and underground pollution. Shoreline zoning isn't, we're staff of 3. We don't get a lot of love. So, but we've hired a lot of interns lately. And those college kids are really, really smart with GIS stuff. And way smarter than me. And I think they could put something together really, really quickly and be able to get us to that map making part. Yeah.
Unfortunately, if they go, I wish I could stay, prior commitment for class 10.
Yeah, no worries. Take care.
Thank you for everything.
Yeah.
Is there any thought being put into how we deal with sea level rise along the coast when we got structures that are they're gonna be higher than 35 feet if they get.
Yeah, so there was a bill that got put in directly related to the rise, and it changed the definition, the statutory definition of a height. Which the town would have to, but it measures height differently in areas that are impacted by the FEMA flood zones. So instead of measuring from sounds cool. Instead of measuring from the downhill side of the ground prior to construction to the peak of the roof, the general definition of height that's been in shoreline zoning forever. In FEMA flood zoned areas, you would measure from the bottom of the sill to the height. So if you need to raise your structure, kind of, again, Louisianification of Maine, if you need to put it on posts so you can get it up to a higher area to allow for flow through, so you're meeting the FEMA flood zone stuff, or breakout walls or whatever they require. Sue Baker's way more educated on that than I am. The height measurement is different in that case. So you're gonna be measuring from the bottom of, essentially the bottom of the wooden section of your structure to the peak of the roof. So it's gonna allow you some play to rise. The good thing with shoreland zoning is, especially in a coastal community, we're probably on the leading edge of sea level rise, because as things rise, the setback doesn't decrease. So if it's a new structure being built, if the sea level came up 3 feet and now covers 10 more feet of land, then you're already gonna have to build 10 further feet back. So that's a plus in that regard. Dealing with the structures that currently exist, that was our best option. We worked with Sue Baker, we worked with the FEMA folks, we worked with the legislators to come up with a definition that was equitable, that allows people to move up out of the 100-year flood zone. And gives them, I think it's an additional 3-foot buffer to get even above that.
Is that a law, or is it
Yep.
in place?
So I'm sorry if I'm jumping in right here. It's just, we have some people who are starting to leave online and here as well. So if it's all right with everyone, I'd like to sort of wrap up the presentation you already had.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, when we close the presentation, people want to stick around and talk. I don't know what your schedule looks like, but if you want to stick around and chat with
Sure.
them on these specific questions, that's fine. But we do want to just kind of don't hold you up all night.
Yeah, no, that's fine, and I'm
You probably
sure,
want to sit down at some point.
yeah, I do a lot of sitting during the day. But this presentation obviously is available for people. I'm sure you're gonna make it available.
Share it.
Share it with everybody. If you wanna, just to, we'll go over one more quick thing. Why don't you, just because it comes up a lot, go down to the relocation first slide.
Relocation.
One more. Yep. This is something else that comes up with planning boards all the time. And to get back to your point, yes, it's in statute, that definition change. So it's live now about moving buildings up.
Yeah. Can you give me a reference?
We're working on adopting it right now.
Okay,
We'll do it at the town meeting next year.
why don't you give me your email address after and I will ship it directly to you, or I'll share it to the group and they can distribute it that way. That way everybody can see it, because it's something that everybody down in this area is probably gonna want to get involved with.
Is the 100-year floodplain based on the high annual tide or something?
Right, so the FEMA flood zone is based off from the highest annual tide for the year, in addition to 100-year flood stage, I think is how Sue has explained it to me. But again, Sue Baker is way more educated on that, unfortunately. But, so, just wanted to touch on this one. Planning boards, you get a lot of, if you remove more than 50% of a structure, you gotta go through Grace Practical Extent Review. A lot of times when people do that, they also want to do an expansion at the same time, right? You gotta do something. So you almost have to look at the application as 2 separate and distinct projects. You relocate first and expand second. So can you make that full screen somehow? Could you?
Yeah.
Oop.
Yeah, I know. I had to
That's
go
okay.
all the way down.
That's okay. So a lot of times people, yeah. So in this situation here, you got your original location of the structure and they like, yeah, I'm gonna move it back. I'm gonna move it back to here, and then I'm gonna do this huge expansion off the back of this. That's not it. You gotta relocate the original footprint to the most conforming location, and then you do your expansion. So it would end up being the way it is on the right side. That's something that folks struggle with all the time. I get calls from planning boards about this.
Yeah, we will, for some reason, the PowerPoint's now sort of dying, so people won't be able to see it online right now.
Yes, that's fine. That's fine. Well, we'll got that down in a second, so. the key is, like I said, you relocate the original footprint to the greatest practical extent. You revegetate the original location, and then you do your expansion. So essentially, like I said, two separate applications. And people do struggle with that, and I understand, because, you know, people just, I want to do it all at once. Well, you are doing it all at once physically on the face of the earth. You just, the review process is key to make sure that building gets back to that conforming location. So, but yeah, I'm stick around for a little bit. People do have some more questions. There's a ton more slides in here. I have this slideshow set up so we can talk about distinct issues that come up with folks. So, take some time, go through the PowerPoint if you'd like. If there's things that are like, huh, I don't understand that. The very last slide here is, yeah, if you want to jump to that.
Hopefully I can.
Yeah, you'll be go for.
We should have just had to keep talking. That was it, the question to the end. Yeah. Oh my gosh, how much? Okay.
Yep, so this is how we do it. A lot of people have like just headshots and stuff, but we get out and actually enjoy the resources that we spend all this time protecting, because ultimately, to be honest with you, that's why I'm still employed here. Behind the scenes, I started in land in 05-ish. And since I have been in the Land Bureau in Augusta, I have seen 73 people come and go. That's just in Augusta. There's only 15 people in our unit when it's maxed out. So 4.5 complete flushes of people. Now, either I just didn't get the memo, you know, I'm not that smart. I don't know what it is.
You still get paid though.
I do get paid, but when I go on these hunting and fishing trips with my buddies, the same guys that I went to high school with, so it's a very unique situation. You know, not a lot of people have that. Same 15, 20 guys for my whole life. When I sit down at the poker table, I am by far the lowest paid person there. But I am also the person that sees every kid's soccer game, field hockey game, baseball game, tennis match, swim meet, graduation, or anything. It really isn't about the money for me. I wish I had more. Who doesn't? I came from nothing, still have nothing, so I don't know any better.
Came from nothing and still have most of it.
Right. I got a little bit less meniscus in this knee, but you know, that's, other than that, pretty much the same. But being able to be there is important. Another thing that's really important, and the thing that I talked to the commissioner about, my bureau director, division director, staff, the reason that I've stayed is the work is important. I like to be able to talk to my kids about what I do for work. So when they make their life choices, maybe they don't make them solely based on the economics of things. I think my daughter is probably receiving that message a heck of a lot more than my son. My daughter is now over at UMaine Machias, out in the middle of absolutely nowhere. She went there not knowing a soul because she wanted to pursue marine biology, and that was important to her. When a bunch of her friends are 3 hours away at UMaine Orono, where I went to school, they're enjoying the great hockey season this year, and she's getting evacuated from Machias when a hurricane comes through. But life choices, right? So, but it is important work. It is completely frustrating that so many people have come and gone, because there's been some really great people, but a lot of those people have taken promotions, bettered their career, and I can't begrudge them for that at all. But I'd love to have some of those people still there, and yeah, a little bit of scratch wouldn't be bad. Just so yeah, if you want to send something into the governor, hey, you know, work on that contract thing. We're kind of working without a contract for a while here, but these are our contact numbers and emails. I'm going to be perfectly blunt with you. If you call my phone, you're going to get a voicemail that says, please don't leave me a message. Here's my email. Please email it. And the reason that is I get I don't know, 50, 75 calls a day. And once you get into my voicemail, you're stuck. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I, as often as I try to clean it and check it, and I've actually put a new program on my phone that translates it to visual voicemail, so I can just read it, because listening to voicemails takes a long time. Don't get stuck on it. Shoot me an email, shoot Jess an email, shoot Jeff an email. We can typically respond to you within a day, a couple hours. Gosh, the guy that emailed me this morning, he got a response in 3 minutes. I think he probably fell out of his seat on the other end. But that's the best way to contact us. That's all on there. I have some business cards as well I can hand out, so you'll have my contact information. But ultimately, this is what we're doing. We are employed here, so we can go out and enjoy the resources that we spend so much time protecting. And I guess the last message I'll leave with you guys here and folks on the OWL here. I get calls every year from all over the United States asking me why shoreline zoning in Maine is so effective, why our water quality is so good. New Hampshire's right next door. Ever been to Lake Winnipesaukee? Does not look like Moosehead. Doesn't even look like Sebago. It is super developed. I no disrespect to them. It's just built out in a crazy way. So I get calls, like I said, from all over the place asking that question. And my answer is always the same. It has literally nothing to do with me. It has nothing to do with my staff. It has nothing to do with the legislature. It has to do with you. That's the only reason that it's effective. Because there's just 3 of us. It's 465 towns. 3 people. Doesn't add up. Yes, we are the people involved in setting the guidelines. But it's you folks that are adopting your local ordinance. It's you folks that are administering your local ordinance. It's you folks that are keeping the waters of the state clean. And I know there's a lot of folks within the DEP that want to bang on the drum, say, yeah, no, we're in. Yeah. I've lived it. I've been here for 20 plus years. It's the municipalities. It's the people that are working hard at the local level, boots on the ground, taking the grief from the people that you show up on their property and they are not happy that you're there. And I don't know how many times they've been told they pay my salary and I'll have your job. My answer is always the same. I rip my keys off my belt and throw them on the hood of the truck and say, it's all yours. You can have it. You think you can do it better. You think you can bring the pride to it, then go for it. But the reality of the situation is our team of 3, as much as we really love what we do and really put forth a lot of effort, we're 3 people. At the municipal level, there's 10, 20 people working on that one little community. That's super important because that's what keeps the water good. That's what keeps our state vacation land. That's why people keep coming here. That's why people pay $300,000 for a $100,000 house, is because of the water quality. And it's because of the work that you all do. And that's a message that I learned a long time ago, talking with Rich Baker. And it's a message that I will keep preaching until I'm done here. But I really appreciate the work that you all do. And I acknowledge, as Max said, we're hard to get a hold of. We're hard to, get on the line sometimes. But trust me, we are working tirelessly to try to make your jobs as easy as possible, to try to make your work as equitable as possible. And if it takes a little bit more time to get to us, that's, again, pounding on the drum, getting the governor's ear. We need more staff. It would be great to, be in line with some of the other bureaus and the other departments to have more staff to be able to provide more assistance. But when we can get out to these things and talk to a group, we'll absolutely do it as many times as we can. And something amazingly enough that I've talked to my daughter about when I started doing this job. Even when I was in college, I took a public speaking class and I was like, oh my God, this is the worst thing ever. I do not like this. I am so nervous. I can't even believe that I'm doing this. And my first presentation at the DEP, I had my boss, Mike Mullen, who was great. Sitting in the front row, heckling me the whole time, and I'm like, oh my God, I think I'm gonna quit, like, this is awful. But to be honest with you, this is the good stuff. This is the best part of the job, getting out, talking to people, spreading the word, letting people know how much we appreciate the work that they're doing, so thank you guys, it isn't us at all.
Well, I won't have to, we appreciate you being here. We have a few people already saying thank you for doing this online. Can't speak for everything else.
Yeah. Glad to be here. But I'm sure there'll be questions. And if you're the type of person like, man, I don't wanna do it right now, there's my email address.